AITA for taking the last piece of steak at the family dinner table, even though my wife told my stepson he could have it. I'm at a moral conundrum here and was hoping to hear an outside perspective. I've been married for 3.5 years, my wife has a son from a previous marriage. He is 13 years old and has the same appetite that I did when I was 13, which is to say, he eats like a pig in a dirt factory. I am a manual laborer and the only one who works in the house after my wife had our baby who's now just turned 2. Finances are a lot better than they could be because I inherited my family home and we both own our cars, but you know, I'm poor so we aren't doing great. I frequently skip lunch and breakfast and just drink water so my wife and the 2 kids can eat well, and I'll usually just have dinner instead. I came home from work last night and helped my wife finish up dinner, which was steak and potatoes and broccoli. There was enough steak to go around and there was some spare too. I went ahead and ate what was on my plate, but I was still hungry when I was done. By this point my wife had left baby with me so she could go for a bath, and as I went to grab the last steak which was on the plate and my stepson said, "That's mine," Mom said, "I could have it." I gotta admit, I didn't even think. I said, "Sorry kid, you can have all the cheesy potatoes and broccoli in the world and I'll let you have an extra dessert, but this steak ain't going in your belly." I ate it, and I'm glad I did because I was absolutely ravenous. My wife was majorly upset with me that night and told me I had disrespected her and her son, as well as her decision-making. She told me she gave me the biggest steak, and that should have been enough. I apologized to her honestly and meant it, but I told her I also felt disrespected because she knows I don't eat anything apart from dinner to try and make sure the kids don't have to go without, and I shouldn't have to go hungry for my main meal for a 13-year-old. AITA for having a baby when you can't afford food for you, your son, and your wife. IDK personally I think NTA. You are going without for your kids. It's okay for a kid to be told no sometimes, even if his mom did say he could initially have the steak. You let him have extra dessert, I'm sure he wasn't too upset. I can't believe people are so without empathy that they think it's okay to call a man who's the sole provider of his home who starved himself for his wife and kids the asshole cause he wanted some extra dinner. Scraping by dinner is a full-size steak, 2 sides and dessert, own a home, and 2 cars, wife privileged enough to be a SOM, have savings, refuse to look into assistance food banks. I was starving, freedom to nitpick specifically which seconds he has to fill his starving belly. I wanted the steak, not the potatoes and broccoli. Those 2 don't fill me up, steak does. And you're not actually sure whether your wife and son are allergic to gluten or not. Apart from the son. Get some perspective. Nah. People shouldn't be starving and fighting over food. But that is the situation. May I suggest more protein in your meals? Chicken legs are tons cheaper than steak. AITA. The kid isn't responsible for you skipping breakfast and lunch. If his mom promised it to him, you should have let him have it or split it with him. BC, now you've made it into you versus mom, and you're the bad guy stepdad. AITA, why wouldn't you just split it with him? Info. Why couldn't you have split the leftover steak, cheesy potatoes and broccoli? AITA. Why does poor planning on your wife's part mean you get to take something he was promised? If you eat 1 meal a day, shop and cook like you're only eating 1 meal a day. If he hadn't already been promised a steak, I'd side with you taking it since you're the one working for it, but it's kind of a dick move to just tell the kid to go kick rocks because of poor planning and poor communication. You own your house and cars, but still don't have enough money to live? AITA. You could have split the steak. Also, you are either lying about how little you eat, or you are all dumb if you are skipping 2 meals a day and buying steak for dinner. You can get a loaf of bread and peanut butter for less than a steak. NTA, unless the kid didn't get any meat at all. Skipping 2 meals a day is tough, makes sense that if there were extras they should be going to you. Also, if money is tight, next time buy chicken or sausage at 1/4 of the price and make enough for everyone. That way you and your son will both eat your fill. If you can't afford to keep everyone full, why are you buying steak? Info. Why can you guys afford that much steak and dessert, but not cheap decent food for you to have lunch? AITA. I frequently skip lunch and breakfast and just drink water so my wife and the 2 kids can eat well. This is complete bullshit, dude. Rice and beans cost nearly nothing, and much less than having 2 steaks for dinner. If you are really this broke, get on public assistance and stop buying expensive cuts of meat. If you aren't, stop using your weird diet as leverage at the dinner table. NRA, have you checked out the food banks in your city? They are pretty good. You should start figuring out a way to eat at least one more meal. Filling breakfast foods are pretty cheap per day, so you aren't starving at dinner, and maybe ask your wife to give you a heads up if spare food isn't really spare, as in she already promised it to someone else, or even throw one more portion or half portion of meat into each dinner so there's enough for both big eaters to have seconds. If money is too tight for everyone to get full, then it might be time to look at the budget to see if another $50 week can be moved to the food budget. If not, see if your wife can get a part-time job. Even 10 hours per week should be enough to bulk up the grocery budget. NTA, there was other food for the kid to eat. Your wife handled it wrong. Also, is his father not contributing child support? AITA. Not just for taking the steak, but for blaming your wife and kids for your own bad eating habits. You wouldn't have been so ravenous if you'd had a bowl of oatmeal, which costs like, what, 5 cents per serving? Or a couple of eggs, which would set you back 20 cents at most. You aren't saving any money by skipping the cheapest meals of the day and then eating double servings of expensive shit like steak. Stop playing the martyr. Head over to RE Cheap and Deal or ARPA Vertifinance if you really don't know how to stretch your groceries. Hot tip. Fill up on cheap godsends like beans, rice, and veggies, which are scientifically proven to be more filling than meat, then supplement with moderate quantities of more affordable cuts of meat purchased in bulk on sale and frozen. As a parent, I'm gonna say AITA for letting your kids experience the scraping by feeling if you are eligible for assistance. You are obviously not eating enough yourself if you have lost 40 pounds and are still ravenous after a full dinner. Apply for food stamps or at least WIC. I grew up in a similar situation, and I was never hungry and barely even knew we were poor because my mom was a wizard with the food stamps and budgeted and planned meals, so we had abundant food. So let me get this straight, you're the only one working, you're skipping meals to make sure they have enough to eat, and they live in your house. They sound incredibly ungrateful for what you do for them. Are you there for any reason expect to pay the bills? NTA. It sounds like you already compromise enough with the family's interest at heart. What you said was reasonable. If he wanted more food, you gave him options. I get why the boy would be annoyed. Your wife had already said he could have it, but if he understood how hard it is to work on an empty stomach, then I'm sure he would understand. He may not now, but he will in time. I would have a word with your wife just to reiterate why you did it, and the fact that you posted this question shows that you did not do this with malice, but purely as a primitive need. Eat more regularly through the day. You shouldn't have taken food that was promised to someone else. Why can you not afford breakfast or lunch, but you can afford steak for dinner? NTA. Have read all your replies, and as a farmer and a farmer's wife I feel for you, and given the kiddo already had himself a whole steak, meal, etc. NTA. My husband will fluctuate weight a ton during harvest seasons due to just foregoing meals, and I have to harass him to keep himself fed sometimes. I'm surprised your wife isn't more on the team here and feel like this should be a good intro to a calm discussion about caloric needs and how everyone in the family needs them met, including you. Manual labor sucks, and eating once a day isn't really healthy when you have the high-calorie needs of manual labor. It's great that you found a blessing in losing 40 pounds, but make sure you're also keeping yourself healthy throughout all this sacrifice. Check out ARPA Vertifinance maybe for some ideas on how to improve or shift things so you can all be satisfactorily fed. Solution: instant ramen. Plenty of carbs, decently filling, and cheap. Instead of arbitrarily declaring your wife's promise null and void, you could have treated your stepson like a fellow human being with some rights to what he was promised and explained the situation to him, giving him the chance to be magnanimous. Odo, your wife sounds like she overreacted after making a promise she probably shouldn't have made without your input. It helps to remember that you've signed on to spend years with these people, at least. A little bit of diplomacy can go a long way. AITA, if you can barely afford to feed your family, what are you doing having a new kid? That's literally why you're hungry. Not blaming the little guy, he didn't choose this, but contraception is a thing, and so are other measures considering you can't literally feed yourself. Also, your stepkid is growing up. He needs all the food he can get. He's genuinely hungry 24/7. Not saying your hunger is less valid, but going hungry won't hinder your growth and performance at school, where you need to absorb info all the time plus perform at sports via job that, I assume, is more or less a fixed routine. This is the literal situation most of our ancestors described where they would go hungry for their kids. Except that they didn't have the choice to postpone having kids until the grass was greener or not to have them at all. AITA not for eating the last steak, but for doing so in the way you did after the stepson told you about what your wife said. You're an adult and this is your family. It was disrespectful to the wife and you could have split it, even if the split was unfair. There was a better way to go about it. Also, I was the kid in this scenario in my family poor manual labor. My dad always got an extremely large plate or a second plate set aside for him. My brother and I were always in awe of the eating prowess of my dad. Although I don't think my dad would have ever yoinked my food though, not a shot at you op, I think we had a familial understanding of food needs. NTA. You should privately talk to your wife about how hungry you are and about dinners being your main meal and you need all the protein you can get. She told me she gave me the biggest steak and that should have been enough. The kids are getting to eat lunch and breakfast. I'm not. I need to eat more in the evening than the rest of the family. NTA. You're the only one who works and she's telling you can't eat your fill the one meal you eat? You pay to feed her and her kid that isn't yours. She is extremely disrespectful and I am sorry you live with someone who treats you like that. My father is similar to you, physical labor and only eats dinner, he gets whatever he wants at dinner, including seconds. Other people who don't work all day can eat what's left. You should be the priority at dinner, no question. I feel like AITA because I find it stupid you're eating steak at all if you can't afford breakfast and lunch. At the end of the day I think you should have split it at the very least. You being ravenous isn't your stepson's fault and you going completely against your wife is divisive. AITA whether it was promised or not, there's no reason you couldn't have shared it. You are making excuses for yourself about deserving the last steak because you didn't eat breakfast and lunch, and the excuses change. You say you can't afford to eat them and go without so your family can eat, then you say you leave too early in the morning, then you say you lost 4 pounds after switching to one meal a day, and you realized you can live without, then you can't eat bread alone. Whatever your reasoning, it is clearly your choice not to eat breakfast and lunch. You can make overnight oats in a Kilner jar and take it with you in the morning and make and freeze a batch of ham sandwiches for your lunch so that no bread goes moldy. There are many options within your grasp if money is really the issue. As such there's no reason to be a dick and play the patriarch over dinner. Be nice and share. Not sure who Ta is, but y'all are idiots for having steak when you're broke. Buy something cheaper and you can all eat enough. AITA steaks can be shared. NTA. You're already going without while being the sole provider for the family. The kid had breakfast, lunch and a steak dinner, he isn't entitled to leftovers. Wife shouldn't have given away the steak without checking if you wanted more. Kid should have asked to share rather than feel entitled to all because mom said yes, he's old enough to start learning that. You should obviously have shared and you're making excuses to appear justified when you're pretending it was that or going hungry because cheesy potatoes and broccoli wouldn't fill you. I know it's not easy and I'm not one to talk, but you need to make better food choices. It's not healthy to eat just once a day as you do, and you can afford something cheap for lunch and or brekkie. Now you trumped your wife who surely didn't know you would want the second steak when she offered it to the child. Stepson should eat broccoli and deal with it, but maybe next grocery trip, you should buy enough food for everyone including yourself to have 3 squares a day. Growing boys need food just as much as hardworking men. Not to judge your lifestyle choices, but chicken and beans are much cheaper protein alternatives to steak. NTA. If you are the sole breadwinner and your wife is a stay-at-home mom, she needs to be the one planning the budget and groceries, where no one is skipping any meals on a daily basis. If she and her son are allergic to certain types of food, then she needs to also accommodate those that aren't. She shouldn't be mad that you took the last piece of steak. You work what looks like extremely long hours doing manual labor without eating properly throughout the day. She has no right to be upset if she can't furnish you food to sustain you throughout the day. Your body will not be able to keep pace without the proper nutrition, and if she doesn't see that, then you need to tell her. If she doesn't care, then you're basically a meal ticket for her and the kids. NTA. Chris Rock did a stand-up comedy a few years ago. One of the segments is where one of the kids takes the last pork chop. Dad works hard all day and he needs that pork chop. Mom freaks out. The skit continues with how mom, still freaking out, is going to dress up some other food to resemble a pork chop. You don't take away a working man's pork chop. AITA for multiple reasons, least of which being who ate the final steak. AITA for not sharing the steak. If your son could have had veggies and potatoes instead, so could you. You say you're skipping breakfast and lunch so your family can eat, but then eat the food yourself. You are disrespecting your wife when you go against a decision she has already made without consulting her or even compromise, splitting the steak. AITA don't have children until you can afford to feed everyone. It's not your stepson's fault you skipped breakfast and lunch. You could have had the extra sides and dessert instead or even split it with him. Plus seriously, you could easily make cheap breakfasts like oatmeal. You could a huge tin of oatmeal for a couple bucks and eat for a couple weeks on it easily. Nah, I'm really struggling with this. I totally get that you were hungry. I totally get the kid was hungry, plus he was expecting to eat the steak before you took it. It's just a rotten situation. It would have been nice if you had cut the steak in half and split it with him. Why not at least share it? The kid? It's not his fault you are hungry, not saying it's your fault either, as this is obviously a difficult situation, but he shouldn't be punished for it. Everyone in this situation sounds a bit entitled. AITA should have at least cut it in half and shared. Except the stepson. You and your wife have made some bad choices. Starvation is not a good or sustainable option for anyone. Info: how big are these steaks? Nutrition aside, potatoes should be just as filling depending on how much is left. The way this post is worded makes out that this steak is big enough to take up from starved to fed. What is a poor family doing with a bunch of 10 to 14 ounces steaks? Shouldn't chicken and ground beef be the better option financially? So you and your wife have no idea how to budget appropriately or plan economical meals, and instead of discussing that, you punish your growing child. NTA: this man does manual labor, often misses meals during the day, and is the only one in the household that is working. She had better be goddamned sure he is getting enough to eat, because if he gets worn down or sick and can't work, this family will be in trouble. Sounds like it is time for your wife to find a job. But on different levels. 1. You do have a right to be able to eat what's left over, but you are not entitled to it. 2. Your stepson has the right to be able to eat what's left over, but he is not entitled to it. 3. Your wife has the right to be able to promise what she can to her son, but she didn't tell you, and therefore shouldn't have gotten angry. Poor communication isn't your fault, but it is your, plural, problem. 4. You did offer extra sides and dessert to your stepson, which I find to be amazing, and it seems like he agreed to it. 1. If he did agree to it, then that makes your wife an asshole again, because you were able to come up with a compromise, and she should respect that and not get mad. 2. If he didn't agree to it, and you went about eating it anyways without working out a better compromise, then that makes you and your stepson an asshole. You for eating it anyways and not working for a better compromise. Your stepson for not being willing to find a compromise that worked for both you and him. Nah, but next time share, cause it ain't the kid's fault you skip lunch and breakfast. Just an aside, if needed, you can apply for WIC for the children if that kind of assistance would help with your food budget. NTA. Why is everyone complaining about them eating steaks? You know that people who don't have a ton of money deserve to eat steaks sometimes, right? And that sales exist? I grew up poor and my dad would occasionally come home with steaks on sale and we would all be excited. Let people who struggle enjoy things. Maybe you could have shared or maybe explained to your stepson a little better about why you deserved the steak. Maybe he doesn't realize that you go without sometimes. NTA. IMO for stealing the steak. This seems like a you snooze, you lose situation with who wants the best leftover bit of dinner. If there was still potatoes and whatever for dessert, no one was going hungry, so it's not a big deal. However, you are an asshole for this comment. I am the only one who works. You may be the only one bringing home money in the household currently, but she sure as shit is working her ass off all day looking after both of your child and a 13-year-old, and still managing to put food on the table for you at night, possibly do household chores as well. AITA because he told you it was his before you ate it, and you went, lol, sucks to be you essentially. You could have had cheesy potatoes and broccoli and extra dessert. You could have been like, I'm really hungry from working hard all day, how about we split it and both have a bunch of cheesy potatoes and broccoli? And either way, you should have addressed it nicely and privately with your wife that you go without other meals and are the breadwinner here, and she shouldn't promise leftovers to him before the whole family has had their first serving, and that you'd like first dibs on leftovers because of all that, like people who respect each other. You undermined your wife's parenting and disrespected her to her son. Not disagreeing or undermining your co-parent in front of the child is rule number one of being effective parents. If you'd tried this and she was still doing crap like that, then I'd say she's the asshole. Ergo. Yes, in theory, you deserve that steak more, but you should have addressed the fact your wife promised leftovers to her son when she knows you go without and work hard all day in terms of what happens in the future, instead of just undermining her in the present and creating a potentially worse problem. Also, I have a hard time believing you're buying steak and so broke you literally can't afford breakfast and lunch. Rice and beans are cheap as chips and filling af, why was your dinner's steak if you're that broke? Why aren't you getting cheaper dinners to save enough money to have some rice or ramen for lunch? You guys could make a better plan work, that's what you should be focusing on, not where any particular steak goes. This is something you should be dealing with privately with your wife. She needs to check out some places that teach how to shop cheap. NTA, it sounds like you sacrifice quite a lot for your family. Maybe it's time your wife look for a way to supplement your income so you can all eat enough. Being a som isn't working if your family is not getting enough to eat. You could have offered to split the steak. NTA. You're the sole breadwinner and providing for a kid that isn't even yours. Everyone else can go pound sand. However, if you're interested in how you can eat more and go without less, I may have a modest proposal for you. Okay, I'll admit, being the step kid myself, I was gonna go burn the witch. But seeing the situation is pretty conflicting for sure. So some families decide to have a kid knowing they are struggling, and that does give you some flack. Step-kid shouldn't be asking just his mom, but you too. Since you are the parent and that's common courtesy. You also didn't ask, but you are going without food more than everyone else in the house while also providing money. They shouldn't bend to your every whim, but they do need to understand how much you put into helping your family. This was a weird one for sure. NTA. In my house, adults ate first and what they wanted and needed. Kids always got a full plate, but leftovers were decided on by parents. The kid may think he's still hungry because it's there, but I guarantee if he went and chilled out, he would not want the whole other steak. He won't starve, unlike you who is making sacrifices for your family. You're not cruel for having a baby. I do whatever I had to with my so to be able to have a baby and still provide. Lot of shit to go over here. Your wife shouldn't promise anything to anyone without consulting people who would be affected by it. It isn't her call to make. You shouldn't be buying steak if you can't afford enough food for everyone. You shouldn't deny your kid food despite you not eating all day. Kids eat more than adults. They're burning through more than you could imagine. Calling dibs or the equivalent on food is straight up terrible and under no circumstances should be done in a family setting unless a kid bought the food with their own money because it's then theirs. The comparison of bigger piece to two pieces still leaves you with less, so your wife's reasoning is whack. If your kid was still hungry and so were you, spilt it. It's not that hard. It would still leave you with more steak, but make sure your kid doesn't go hungry. If you couldn't afford feeding 4 people, you guys shouldn't have had a baby. It's common courtesy to ask the occupants of the table if they want any bit of the last piece, because it's the last piece. Taking it like you did shows poor manners and illustrates at least what your initial thought of the world is. If I want it, I should have it because I deserve it, and since this happened in a more casual scene, probably what your general attitude towards the world and people around you is. Your solution to you being able to have the steak and not sharing with your son was to give him more dessert. That's revolting and abusive. Consensus? Eat or get off your high horses. You're not justified in depriving a kid of more filling food just because you don't eat on your own accord and you choose to bring another life in the world despite struggling to feed everyone. And to top it, you think feeding a child more unhealthy food is a justifiable reason to eat the healthy food a growing kid needs. You need a reality check if you believe with all of this you stand in the right and have done no harm. A good slap with the Atlanta phone book is the right direction, and I'd recommend giving it a try. Tough one. I see both sides. This is your money after all, your house. You have the claim, I guess. But also, is it really necessary for you to skip meals for them to eat well? I can afford to eat 3 meals a day, but I don't, I just eat one BC. I'm too lazy to make lunch and breakfast. I think make yourself a sandwich or something. The whole "I only eat once a day" is an excuse. Go with it's your house, your money, your food. AITA. What the hell are you doing getting steak for the 3 damn people getting enough to have leftovers? Seconds at that if you're so poor that you're skipping breakfast and lunch. Even cheap steak at Aldi is still 3-4 times the cost of alternative options that would provide more food or save you more money to spend on other food, etc. And it be at least just as nutritious. Steak ain't exactly all that healthy for you. Why is there extra dessert at that? If you're that poor, you need to food budget a hell of a lot better. Honestly, you're just making excuses, like pointing out that you're the only one with a job that you sacrifice and not eat breakfast and lunch to provide for the other 3. You're a family, you're a team, you and your wife are partners, you ain't top dog, the man of the house, blah blah blah. You're just one member of a team. Don't be a dick and don't undermine your wife like that. Your stepson is also at a vulnerable stage in his development, and you've just shown him you don't respect him or his mother, which is a shitty step-parent move. Honestly, I think you really need to take a long hard look at your spending. I mean, I don't know your particular scenario, but if I was a betting, knowing as many laborers as I do, I'd bet there is some unnecessary spending that you would be able to cut for the food budget that you're just not choosing to. Smokes, drugs, junk food, buying drinks at work like coffees, milk, alcohol both for home and possible after-work drinks, gambling, e.g. pokies, video games, other non-important shit, and that's why you're really missing out on lunch and breakfast. The choice was to cut out something, and you choose to cut back on food instead, and now you're complaining about it. NTA. Nah. You need help, and I'm happy to be the internet stranger to tell you that this isn't sustainable. Think about visiting a food bank or applying for SNAP WIC for the baby. You might also like our Paverdifinance and our cheap and Yilthy. I'm sorry you're in this situation, and I hope things get better for your family. This entire situation just makes me so fucking sad. I would go without in every way for my kids to be able to eat. I feel so sad that you skip meals so they can eat better. Still, I fear you're the asshole. NTA, because you probably burn way more energy than the kid, but you could have split the steak honestly, like the kid was promised it. You were still hungry, 50-50 would have been best.